A mother named Mary was denied entry at the doors of a luxury boutique in Paris simply because she didn't look wealthy enough. But just a few weeks later, her daughter, Jasmine Crockett, a U.S. congresswoman, quietly acquired the very fashion house that had humiliated her mother. No one was terminated. No one was publicly condemned. And yet, the entire fashion world was shaken to its core. How could one act of composed grace disrupt the foundation of the luxury industry? Stay with us. This is a story worth every moment of your attention. Paris was unfamiliar to her, but on this brisk spring morning, Mary Crockett moved with a calm resolve. It was her 76th birthday, and for the first time in decades, there was no one else who needed her care. No classrooms to tidy, no meals to stretch for yet another child, no sorrow to hide. Just her, and a vow. She would not let this milestone fade away like the others. Wrapped in a well-worn brown coat, shoes softened by years of use, and a scarf gifted to her by her daughter in college, she made her way along the cobbled streets with quiet determination. The city's elegance didn't overwhelm her. It intrigued her. Rising like a modern cathedral before her stood Maison Diodo, its windows glowing with golden light, silk swirling behind the glass like flame caught in crystal. Mary paused, not to window shop or compare costs, but to decide and to possess something lovely. One scarf, she told herself. She envisioned it draped around her neck, not for vanity, but as a quiet affirmation of worth. She stepped forward, her heart calm, chin raised, unaware that in less than a minute, her dignity would face a trial she hadn't experienced since the era of segregated waiting rooms. As Mary reached for the door, everything changed. A man in a sharp black suit stepped into her path. Tall, young, refined, and rehearsed. His posture flawless, his face unreadable. But his eyes said it all before his lips even parted. They flicked to her coat, lingered on her shoes, and noted the worn edges of her handbag. The silence between them stretched, a warning in itself. "Madam," he finally said, his voice smooth and cool, "we're closed for a private event."
No επάλεγει. No explanation.
Just a cold wall of words, delivered with the precision of someone well-practiced in this exact ritual. Behind him, the store sparkled like a fantasy. Women in designer heels sipped champagne beneath chandeliers. Scarves fluttered between manicured fingers. Laughter floated through the air like expensive perfume. Mary blinked. "I saw those people go in," she said softly, gesturing toward the couple that had just entered. He didn't even glance. "They're on the guest list," he replied curtly. Then came the smile, not warm, not polite. The kind of smile that tells you exactly what someone thinks of you. You might be more comfortable shopping by the river. The souvenir boutiques. The words struck harder than she'd anticipated. They weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried the razor-sharp edge of quiet cruelty. Precise, deliberate, and dismissive. Mary stood her ground. Her shoulders held firm. Her hands clenched the small coin purse tucked in her coat pocket. This wasn't just about a scarf anymore. It was about how the world continued to see her. Her age, her clothes, her skin. All of it judged and discarded in a single glance. "I just wanted to buy myself a small gift," she said, voice soft but unwavering. "It's my birthday today." He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't care. The door remained closed, gleaming and untouchable, guarding a world that had never truly welcomed her. The injustice didn't burn like fire. It ached like an old bruise being pressed again. She could have pushed back, demanded a manager, raised her voice, caused a scene. But Mary had lived long enough to know that when a door is locked by prejudice, knocking harder rarely opens it. It only bruises your hand. So she nodded once, almost imperceptibly, turned, and stepped back into the drizzle. Not defeated, not broken, just weary, tired of always having to earn her right to be where she already belonged. And just a few steps away, someone saw the entire thing. Lucille, 19, only 3 weeks into her probationary period at Maison Diodo, stood frozen behind a marble counter near the entrance. She had been arranging display scarves when she noticed the security guard's tone change. That clipped, condescending edge she'd heard before, used on delivery workers, janitors, and now this elderly woman in a brown coat. Lucille's fingers froze. She turned just enough to witness the whole scene. The cold rebuff, the sweeping glance at Mary's shoes, the insult cloaked in a fake smile. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest. She knew this wasn't about protocol, it was a performance. A rehearsed exclusion, carried out by someone who'd done it many times before. Her stomach knotted. She wanted to intervene, to speak up. Anything. But her manager's warning echoed in her head. Watch. Learn. Don't speak unless asked. So she remained still, silent, ashamed, and complicit. Mary's soft voice, "It's my birthday today," cut through the store's luxury like a cry muffled in velvet. Lucille's chest tightened. She watched the woman retreat into the rain, her steps slow, her presence fading like a shadow not meant to be noticed. Their eyes met for just a moment, but in that fleeting second, Lucille saw it all. The quiet pain, the worn-out grace, the heartbreak of someone who had spent her life being pushed out of places like this. Lucille bit down hard on her lip, and for the first time in her short life, luxury no longer looked beautiful, it looked ugly. Her hands clenched around a scarf worth more than everything Mary was wearing. She wanted to chase after her, to offer her something, to say sorry. But her feet remained rooted, heavy with fear. The store's music kept playing, the lights kept gleaming, and the door that should have welcomed Mary stayed firmly shut, locking Lucille inside a world she was no longer sure she wanted to be part of. Back at the hotel, the lights of Paris shimmered faintly through the rain-streaked window. Mary sat at the edge of the bed, her coat still damp from earlier, her hair pinned back neatly, just like always. Her fingers hovered above her phone, unsure. She wasn't someone who complained, not after years of learning how to quietly swallow disappointment. But something inside her, something tender and worn, needed to speak. She tapped Jasmine's name. The phone rang once, twice. Then her daughter's face lit up the screen. Composed, powerful, likely just out of another meeting in DC. "Mama," Jasmine beamed, her voice warm and sharp at once. "You tearing Paris up already? Or just charming everyone?" Mary let out a soft laugh. "Oh baby, Paris is beautiful. I just took a walk, got caught in the rain. These old knees don't care much for cobblestones," she said with a smile. She glanced down at her hands, folded carefully in her lap. Nothing too exciting. Jasmine's smile faded quickly. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing just slightly. Not suspicious, but focused. She recognized that tone, that overly calm voice her mother used when something had gone wrong. "What happened?" Jasmine asked, her voice cooling into something more controlled. Mary paused for a moment. She thought about fibbing, saying she'd found a cute cafe or seen a nice museum, but her throat tightened. She sighed. "Well, I did try to go shopping," she said, attempting to sound casual. "One of those fancy stores with scarves in the window. Thought I might buy myself a little birthday gift." Jasmine tilted her head. "Maison Diodo?" she asked. "That the one? Pretty spot. Gold handles on the door." Mary nodded slightly. "Yes, I think that's it. Looked real elegant." "What happened?" Jasmine repeated, her voice now low and measured. Mary gave a small, joyless laugh, thin and brittle. Jasmine had only heard that kind of laugh once before, when her mother was denied a bank loan years ago. "Well, there was a young man at the door. Very professional, very polished. He told me they were closed for a private event." She hesitated. "But I saw others going in, fancy folks. I waited patiently. Then he said I might be better off shopping at the tourist boutiques." Jasmine didn't blink, didn't move. Her silence grew sharper. Her eyes darkened. She understood exactly what her mother wasn't saying. Mary continued, trying to fill the air before it got too heavy. "I told him it was my birthday, thought that might soften him a bit. But no, he didn't even acknowledge me after that. So I left. It's nothing to get upset over." Jasmine's voice was barely a whisper. "Infine, sweetheart. These things happen." "No," Jasmine said quietly. "They don't just happen. People make them happen." Mary looked away, eyes tracing the raindrops sliding down the glass. It's not the first time someone's looked at me and decided I didn't belong. Won't be the last. And in that moment, precise, electric, Jasmine felt something deep and primal stir in her. That same heat she'd only known once before. As a child watching her mother walk out of a landlord's office, head held high after being called a risk. She didn't respond immediately, couldn't. Her mother's soft words played over and over in her mind. They said there was a private event. They told me to try the tourist shops. That kind of cruelty always came dressed in civility, and Jasmine recognized it too well. But what caught in her throat wasn't the words. It was how gently her mother delivered them, like they were ordinary, like being dismissed was just part of traveling. Jasmine drew a slow breath, but her chest ached. Even after being humiliated, her mother was still trying to protect her, still softening the blow, still offering a smile through the sting. And then the memories came, uninvited, piercing. She'd been just a girl, maybe 9 or 10, sitting beside her mother inside a small bank in Dallas. Jasmine remembered the scratchy feel of the seat, her feet not quite touching the floor. Mary had dressed carefully, her best blouse pressed, a neat folder in her lap, filled with pay stubs, reference letters, rent receipts, everything prepared. But it hadn't mattered. The man behind the desk had clean nails, a pale gold wedding ring, and a gaze that never quite rested on Mary. He flipped through the papers, nodded thoughtfully, and said, "Unfortunately, with just one income and your credit history, this isn't the kind of loan we feel confident about." It wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Detached, decided before the folder had even opened. Jasmine had looked up at her mother, waiting for a protest. But Mary just smiled, thanked him, and took her daughter's hand as they walked back into the sweltering Texas sun.
No tears. No anger.
Just that quiet, heartbreaking grace. Jasmine had never forgotten. Not that moment. Not the boutique clerk who followed Mary around the store. Not the landlord who asked for extra paperwork after seeing her skin. Not the teacher who once questioned if Mary could afford the science field trip. And now this Paris, the place her mother had dreamed of for years, saved up for, finally reached, only to be pushed out by a door that swung open for everyone else. But Jasmine clenched her jaw, her fingers twitching on her desk in D.C. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold, measured, composed. The kind of poised calm that made grown men shift uncomfortably in congressional hearings. "All right, Mama," she said. "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." Mary blinked. "Jasmine, really, don't turn this into something. These things happen." "No, Mama," Jasmine said, her gaze unwavering, eyes locked on the screen. "They keep happening. That's the issue." Mary fell silent, but it wasn't an empty pause. It was heavy, saturated with years of mutual understanding. They both knew exactly what this was. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to argue. Her mind was already made up. The expression in her eyes shifted, not fiery with rage, but glacial with intention. Steady, lethal, because the world had just disrespected the one person Jasmine Crockett had spent her entire life protecting and elevating. And that was a mistake. Quiet one, yes, but a critical one. As soon as the call ended, Jasmine sat still. The phone rested calmly on her desk like a closed case. The morning light filtered through her office window in soft gray streaks, but her thoughts were already storming. Her mother had stepped into Paris dreaming of elegance and walked out burdened with disgrace. Jasmine recognized that pain. It had many disguises. A rejected loan, a teacher's dismissive remark, a landlord's subtle sneer. But this was more than an ordinary tale of covert discrimination. This was personal, and that made it dangerous for those who assumed it would go unanswered. She rose slowly. The same hands that once drafted policy on criminal reform now tapped 3 names into her secure team channel. Henderson, Barlow, Reyes. The message was simple. Conference room, 7:30 a.m. Paris. We're moving. By the time the sun had fully stretched over Capitol Hill, Jasmine was already on her second espresso, standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling glass wall, staring out at the city that had taught her that power wasn't granted. It was claimed. Her legal advisor arrived first, gripping 2 tablets and a binder. Barlow followed, her finance expert from New York, sharp-eyed, already scrolling through global assets. Then came Reyes, ex-NSA, now her head of operations, silent, calculating. No one asked questions. Jasmine didn't summon people at dawn unless tectonic plates were about to shift. She began without pleasantries. "My mother," she said, "walked into a boutique yesterday, Maison Diodo." A beat.
No teatrix.
Just a pause, like the hush before a thunderclap. She was told she didn't belong. Politely, systematically, quietly. "I'm not here to rage. I'm here to take ownership." Henderson blinked. "You want to file a lawsuit?" Jasmine's eyes stayed fixed. "I want to buy it." Barlow sat up straighter. "Buy the store. I want every part of it. The label, the real estate, the landlord, the liabilities, the franchise. If it's public, make it private. If it's owned, find the flaw. I want to control it bottom to top." The room stilled, reverent now. Jasmine Crockett wasn't threatening retaliation. She was launching a silent offensive, paperwork and equity, not protests and slogans. She turned to the screen behind her and tapped once. A map of Paris illuminated, a pulsing red marker pinpointing the store. "Diodo's hemorrhaging money," she said. "Luxuries shifting. Post-pandemic. They scaled too wide, too quick. They rent the building. The parent firm's overleveraged and late on liquidity reports." Reyes gave a low whistle. "So we strike from the back end?" Jasmine nodded. "We don't shout. We whisper until the foundation cracks." Assignments flew. Layers of anonymous legal vehicles came online. Within 90 minutes, a holding entity in the Cayman Islands had been activated under a bland, untraceable name. "Call it Project D," she said. "D for Dolores. That's my mother's middle name. And when this is over, hers will be the only name they remember." Outside, the world moved on, unaware. But inside that room, a machine had engaged, quiet, methodical, precise. Like gears turning toward an outcome no one saw approaching. Maison Diodo had opened its gilded doors to the elite and slammed them in Mary Crockett's face. Jasmine wasn't coming back to knock. She was coming to own the building and change the locks. The moment Jasmine issued the order, the machinery kicked into full gear. Silent but ruthless. She wasn't on defense anymore. This was a campaign. And her ammunition wasn't anger, it was acquisition. Maison Diodo had cloaked itself in prestige for decades, guarding its legacy like royalty. But Jasmine had dug beneath the surface, behind the luxury. Supply issues, a bloated executive board, and a failed expansion into the Middle East that had spooked investors. The brand was faltering internally. All it needed was strategic pressure. She activated Mirador Capital, an anonymous fund she'd spent years quietly building, for this exact type of move. Untouchable, complex, international. Not a single journalist, regulator, or even political ally could trace it back to her. On paper, Mirador was nothing more than a conservative European hedge fund diversifying away from volatile sectors. In reality, it was Jasmine's scalpel, and Maison Diodo was on the table. The takeover began in silence. Her team tracked down inactive shareholders, retired board members, former creatives who'd clung to stock for sentimental reasons, but had grown weary of the brand's slow decline. One by one, they received discreet buyout proposals well above market value. No questions. Funds wired within 24 hours. Then came the second phase. Distressed equity parcels scattered throughout Europe and the Middle East, many held by hedge funds eager to clean their books before the fiscal year closed. Jasmine's team moved quickly, always through proxies, always using different corporate fronts. Each acquisition was small enough to stay under the radar. But together, they were constructing something enormous. By the close of week 2, Mirador quietly held just under 20%. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would alert the board. But by week 3, the pace accelerated. A Swiss pension fund holding 8% abruptly agreed to cash out. A Middle Eastern investment group offloaded another 9% after Jasmine's team unearthed a discrete compliance issue they were anxious to suppress. Then came the breakthrough. A German luxury consortium, holding 22%, Deodo's second-largest stakeholder, agreed to a full, confidential sale under a strict NDA. The transaction was finalized in 36 hours. That alone pushed Mirador past the 50% threshold. Jasmine didn't stop to celebrate. She pressed forward. Week 4 was for consolidation. Her legal team secured proxy voting rights on the board. Her financial analysts began revising vendor contracts. Internal HR audits were discreetly triggered across 3 departments, quietly, legally, but rapidly. Jasmine had no interest in barging in like a hostile acquirer. She was slipping in through the circuitry, rewriting the system from within while everyone thought the flickering lights were just a glitch. By the 5th week, Mirador quietly acquired 2 more minor stakes in northern France and Quebec. The final count, 61.3% ownership. Jasmine now held controlling interest in a 110-year-old Parisian institution, and no one saw it coming. Not the board, not the employees, not the doorman who greeted high fashion with charm and handed cold glances to simplicity. Every morning, he still stood proudly by the gilded entrance, welcoming wealth with warmth and turning away those who didn't dress the part. He had no idea that his salary, his uniform, even the polished marble beneath his feet, now belonged to the daughter of the very woman he had once turned away without a second thought. Jasmine's name was absent from every document. She wasn't seeking headlines. She was planning a reveal. And when it came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be sharp, calculated. She wasn't just flipping a company. She was reprogramming a legacy, one that had built its prestige on exclusion, and now, unknowingly, had handed its soul to someone who had spent her entire life on the outside. And she was just getting started. 5 weeks passed. Maison Deodo carried on, blissfully unaware of the quiet storm growing inside its walls. The doorman still held perfect posture, sharp gaze, and practiced grace. The showroom staff floated elegantly, fluent in subtle charm and quiet judgment. Silk still shimmered in the window displays. Perfume still lingered in the air. No one realized the building now belonged to the very woman they once deemed unworthy. Then the invitations were dispatched. Each one arrived in a matte black envelope, sealed with wax, inked by hand in gold leaf. No logo.
No sender.
Just a location, a time, and a single phrase pressed across the top. An evening of distinction, honoring those who inspire legacy. Mary Crockett opened hers while seated at the modest desk in her Paris hotel room. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She wasn't part of the fashion world. She had no Parisian ties, only the lingering ache of a door that had shut in her face too swiftly, too harshly. But there it was, her full name, scripted with elegance. Madame Mary R. Crockett. And the venue?
Maison Deodo.
She froze. The name struck her chest like a gust of icy air. Her fingers tightened around the card. Was this some kind of cruel joke? An apology? Or something else entirely? The lettering shimmered beneath the lamp. Formal attire required. RSVP essential. But the note below made her heart stutter. Your presence is not requested. It is needed. She didn't call Jasmine. She didn't have to. She already knew. Her daughter's fingerprints were all over this, though the tone felt different. Not Jasmine's usual fire. This felt orchestrated, intentional, precision over passion. Jasmine wasn't just bringing her mother back to that boutique. She was bringing her in with authority. Across town, inside the staff offices of Maison Deodo, the atmosphere had begun to shift. Lucille was rearranging place cards for the upcoming private gala. She had heard the murmurs. Something was brewing. Something significant. The store was closing early for the event. Executives were flying in. Staff had been instructed to be on their absolute best behavior. But the guest list? It wasn't the usual roster of celebrities and elite clients. It was different. Politicians, professors, civil rights leaders, advocates, community organizers. Names that didn't usually tread the marble corridors of Deodo. As Lucille sorted the stack, her fingers halted on one name, Crockett, Mary. Lucille's breath caught. Mary Crockett. She remembered, clear as crystal, the woman in the plain coat, the doorman's chilling refusal, the quiet devastation on Mary's face as she turned and walked away, head high, dignity intact. And Lucille? She had done nothing. Her stomach sank. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random. Mary was coming back, publicly invited. Something was happening. Lucille scanned the rest of the list, heart pounding. These weren't just VIPs. These were symbols, people who had been overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. And now they were all being summoned to the very place that once turned them away, that had built its prestige on keeping people like them out. For the first time since starting her job at Deodo, Lucille felt her hands tremble. She murmured an excuse and slipped into the back corridor, pressing her back to the wall, her breath coming quick and shallow. Her thoughts spiraled. She remembered Mary's expression. Not furious, not resentful, just exhausted, as if she had seen this same scene unfold too many times in too many places. And now, something was shifting. Lucille had spent weeks pretending that day hadn't mattered, that she'd had no other option, that staying silent had been the only way to preserve her job. But deep down, in the pit of her stomach, she had known. She hadn't just followed protocol. She had betrayed something greater, and now the name was back. Not pleading, not shopping, returning. Back at the hotel, Mary laid the invitation flat on the desk. The envelope still carried a weight she couldn't quite describe. Was she really going back there? Into those same halls that had judged her on sight? Into a world that told her, without needing words, that she didn't belong? That she wasn't worthy of silk or service or the simplest decency? She stood and approached the window. Paris blinked beneath her, golden and cold. Her reflection stared back. Silver hair, steady eyes, the face of a woman who had carried generations forward. And yet, that same face had once been deemed unworthy by a boy in a black suit, armed with nothing but his own assumptions. She reached for her suitcase. She hadn't packed for galas, no gowns, no diamonds, just a plain black dress she kept for emergencies, and a scarf Jasmine had given her the Christmas before, a deep burgundy that always grounded her. She laid them on the bed. This time, she wouldn't walk in hoping to be acknowledged. This time, she would enter knowing they'd be watching. At Maison Deodo, the pre-event staff briefing was tense. The manager spoke rapidly, directing everyone to triple-check their stations, polish every glass, align displays to perfection. The guest of honor remained unnamed. Rumors spread like sparks. An American dignitary, a silent stakeholder, a fashion icon. Lucille said nothing, but deep down she knew. This wasn't just another corporate event. This wasn't marketing. This was a reckoning disguised as elegance. A slow, quiet reversal of the story Deodo had told for more than 100 years. And Mary Crockett? She wasn't returning for closure. She was returning as the storm. The night arrived wrapped in a strange kind of stillness. Not peaceful, but expectant. Paris shimmered under a soft mist. The street outside Deodo glowed under golden lamplight. The storefront gleamed like a jewel, marble polished to brilliance, windows lit like a stage. Inside, staff moved with urgency and grace, adjusting floral displays, verifying name cards, aligning champagne flutes to the millimeter. No one knew exactly who the guest of honor was, only that it mattered, and that no detail could falter. At 6:58 p.m., a black car came to a smooth halt at the curb. The rear door opened slowly. Mary Crockett stepped out.
No diamonds. No luxury logos.
No extravagant shawls or sparkling accents. Just a sleek, elegant black dress that brushed her ankles, cut to fit perfectly. A single pearl earring in each ear, and draped around her shoulders, the burgundy scarf Jasmine had gifted her. Refined, unbranded, commanding, her silver hair was swept into a regal twist. Her walk was composed, steady, not proud, but certain. She was the same woman who had stood there weeks before. But tonight, she carried something the doorman couldn't categorize. presence, history, weight. As she approached, the doorman, Vincent, the same man who had blocked her path with such effortless cruelty, straightened reflexively. He didn't recognize her. He saw the dress, the composure, the elegance, and that was enough to trigger his polished instinct. He gave a slight bow. "Welcome to Maison Diodo, madam," he said smoothly. Stepping aside and holding the door open, Mary paused, only for a moment, just long enough to register it. Her gaze flicked to his face, searching for even a hint of memory. Nothing. He didn't remember the woman in the faded blue sweater and thrifted shoes. But she remembered him. She nodded once, silently, and walked inside. The space unfolded like a scene from a play. Light glittered across the marble floor beneath chandeliers. A string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Staff moved with the precision of dancers in a wordless ballet. The air was thick with perfume and something else, expectation. Mary's heels echoed gently across the floor. She didn't flinch. She didn't gaze around in awe. She didn't hesitate, because this time she wasn't questioning if she belonged. She knew. A young hostess approached with a clipboard. Her voice was bright, respectful. "Bonsoir, madam. May I have your name, please?" But before Mary could reply, another voice rang out, breathless, shocked. "Mary Crockett, Lucille." She stood frozen just a few feet away, her black uniform immaculate, her hair pinned with care, but her eyes wide, brimming with something else. Recognition, regret, reverence. The name had shaken her earlier like thunder, but this, seeing Mary in front of her, composed, luminous, untouchable, was something far more powerful. Mary turned, their eyes locked, and for the first time in weeks, Lucille felt her breath catch in her chest. Not from fear, but from the burden of what she hadn't done. The day Mary had been turned away, Lucille had stood by, a silent observer, too inexperienced, too afraid to intervene. And now that same woman, dressed in quiet sophistication, was being celebrated in the very place where she had once been deemed unworthy. Lucille stepped forward, almost instinctively. "Madam," she said, her voice lower now, more composed. "Welcome back." Mary met her gaze for a long, measured moment. Then she offered the faintest smile, not to pardon, not to erase, but to silently say, "I remember, and I returned anyway." Lucille swallowed hard, then stepped aside and motioned toward the staircase. "You're expected upstairs." Mary moved past her, every footstep deliberate and unhurried, like a clock ticking toward something that could no longer be undone. Behind her, the staff watched in silence. Something had shifted, not just the atmosphere, but the underlying rules. The store itself hadn't changed, but the balance had. And the woman they had once ignored? She had just walked back through the front entrance, without asking for permission. Upstairs, the chandeliers burned with more intensity than usual, casting a warm golden glow across a room filled with polished shoes, sparkling champagne glasses, and the low hum of Parisian elites trading carefully rehearsed pleasantries. But beneath the surface, something different stirred. Something uneasy, unfamiliar. The usual social script of fashion royalty and wealthy patrons had been quietly upended. Among the crowd were unexpected faces. Educators, grassroots leaders, organizers. People who didn't wear couture like second skin but stood just as tall, as though they'd always belonged. Mary stood near the back, close to a balcony that overlooked the boutique below. She didn't speak much. She observed. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one scanning the room, wondering if anyone questioned her presence. A soft, intentional note emerged from the quartet, a deep, rising tone, like the overture to a storm. Then the lights dimmed. The crowd turned, confused. From the shadows behind the grand staircase, a figure appeared, silhouetted in white light, her heels striking the marble with calm precision. She didn't wave. She didn't hurry. She didn't smile. Jasmine Crockett moved forward like a final argument. The music swelled, then fell silent. Jasmine stood at the edge of the stage. Her black gown shimmered like liquid coal, simple but magnetic. Her hair was pulled back, her shoulders firm, her voice cool and unwavering. "Bonsoir," she said, just one word, and the room fell quiet. "I know many of you are wondering why you're here," she began, her gaze sweeping the crowd like a seasoned attorney reading a jury. "And more importantly, who brought you here?" A ripple passed through the audience. Some recognized her, the congresswoman, the civil rights advocate, a rising voice in American politics. But what was she doing here? At Deodo? Jasmine let the silence linger. Then, with a voice like thunder behind glass, she delivered the words that fractured the room. "I am the new owner of Maison Deodo." Her voice echoed across the polished floors, calm, direct, and razor-sharp. No one moved. No one took another sip. The carefully crafted indifference, the postured ease perfected by luxury society, vanished in an instant, because what she was saying didn't feel like a declaration, felt like a sentence. "She came here alone," Jasmine continued, wearing a plain sweater and walking shoes. No stylist, no entourage, just hope. She paused. She stood outside this very boutique, heart full, wallet ready, wanting nothing more than to step inside and pick something beautiful for herself. Not out of vanity,
Not for ego.
but because, after a life of giving and surviving, she finally believed she deserved it. A subtle murmur passed through the room. A few nodded. Others lowered their eyes. Lucille, standing at the back, clenched her hands. "But that day," Jasmine said, her voice tight but controlled, "someone decided with a glance that she didn't belong." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The power was in the stillness. She wasn't told she couldn't afford it. That would have been too crude. No, she was told there was a private event. She paused again. She watched 3 well-dressed strangers stroll in before her. Doors open, no questions. But when it was her turn, they shut. The man standing by the entrance, Vincent, stiffened. His breath caught, though he kept his expression fixed. But now all eyes were on him. "My mother didn't argue," Jasmine said quietly. "She didn't cause a scene. She didn't ask for anyone's approval. She simply turned away, stepped back into the rain, alone, on her birthday, and convinced herself it was nothing." She paused, allowing the sentence to settle like a final gavel strike. But it was a big deal. Her eyes swept the room, every gaze locked on her now. No more whispers, no more shifting, because this is how injustice masks itself today. Not through slurs, not with fire hoses, not with signs nailed to doors, but through selective hospitality. Politeness reserved only for those wearing the right shoes. Closed for private events that somehow always stay open for the right people. She stepped closer to the platform's edge, her tone softer now, but her words struck even harder. "My mother never needed this place. She never did. She raised 3 children alone with elegance, tenacity, and a strength none of you could begin to comprehend. She endured systems built to minimize her. She fed us before she fed herself. She worked double shifts. She marched when it was dangerous, and she never once asked the world to accommodate her." Jasmine's gaze found the center of the room and held it. Her voice dropped. She didn't need a scarf to prove her worth. This store needed her presence to remember its own. For a long beat, no one dared to move. Then Jasmine turned toward Mary. Their eyes locked, mother and daughter, across a room that had once erased one and never expected the other. "I didn't purchase this store for branding," Jasmine said, her voice composed again. "I didn't do it for headlines. I did it so no mother, no teacher, no nurse, no grandmother is ever again told, in quiet, coded language, that her dignity is conditional." Her final words rang out like thunder without lightning. "From this day forward, Maison Deodo does not decide who is worthy. The people do. And these doors will remain open." The room stayed suspended in stillness, because they all sensed something sacred had just been reclaimed. Not just ownership, meaning. And this time, no one would dare close that door again. The silence lingered. Jasmine's words still hung in the air like smoke after a cannon's fire. She had stripped away the illusion Maison Diodo had long wrapped itself in. And yet, her tone remained steady, her gaze unwavering. Yes, she had revealed the wound, but what came next wasn't revenge. It was restoration. She stepped forward, lifting a small card from the podium. Her hands steady, her next words heavier than any before. "I'm not here to fire anyone," she said. "No one will be publicly shamed. That's not how dignity operates." She let the statement land. A few in the crowd relaxed. Managers, sales reps, executives, those who had begun to dread headlines and disgrace. But Jasmine's pause was intentional. What followed would demand more than punishment ever could. "What we're doing is larger than blame," she continued. "We're rebuilding from the foundation, floorboards to ceiling, starting tonight." A new logo flashed behind her on the screen, clean, bold lettering. "Dignity first." "This is not a program," Jasmine said. "It's a principle. It's how this house will function from now on." She pressed a button. The logo faded into 3 major initiatives. "First," she said, voice unwavering, 30% of all Maison Diodo products will now be reserved for what we're calling the Community Access Tier. These would be high-quality items, same craftsmanship, same experience, but offered at significantly reduced prices. A murmur rolled through the crowd again, but Jasmine pressed forward. "To teachers, nurses, paramedics, public servants, those who give more than they take, those who make this world livable for the rest of us." Behind her, a slide showed a digital access card issued through verified government bodies and nonprofit organizations. "This is not charity. It's not a handout. It's recognition. It's access. These workers won't come to Diodo to beg," she said. "They'll come to be welcomed." The next slide appeared: graphs, numbers, projections. "Second," Jasmine continued, 20% of this company's net profits, each quarter, will go directly into the Diodo Scholars Fund for full scholarships, vocational training, private tutoring, not for legacy families, not for industry insiders, but for the children of sanitation workers, hospital techs, delivery drivers, and janitorial staff. The crowd shifted. The energy thickened once more. No one had ever spoken like this within these walls. Jasmine's voice dropped again, quieter, sharper. "Luxury has always borrowed from working-class stories, from our struggles, from our survival, but it never gives back. That ends tonight." She let the stillness stretch before tapping to the third and final slide. "And finally," she said, "every frontline employee of Maison Diodo, from sales staff to doormen, will complete the Dignity Immersion program before ever stepping onto this floor." A few gasps rippled through the audience. "This is not corporate training," she clarified. "This is lived experience." Jasmine moved away from the podium, addressing the room not like a CEO, but like someone giving sworn testimony. "You'll spend 2 weeks volunteering at a women's shelter, a nursing home, a community food center. You'll serve meals, fold laundry, carry trays, listen to stories from people who've lost everything. Only after that will you wear this badge." She held up the newly designed Maison Diodo staff pin, sleek, minimal, with a single word etched beneath the logo: respect. She paused again. This silence was deeper. Some of the wealthier guests looked shocked. Others appeared quietly moved. But every face showed the same realization. This wasn't cosmetic change. It was reform. And reform asks for something real. "No one is exempt," Jasmine said. "Not the board, not management, not even me." She took a breath. Then she nodded toward her mother. "We're going to earn the privilege of serving women like her." Mary's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Jasmine returned to the podium, her voice gentler now, yet still carried a weight like forged steel. "Dignity isn't something we grant. It's the bare minimum we owe." She clicked the remote again. A final slide appeared. Maison Diodo, redefined. And beneath it, the words, crafted with skill, delivered with respect. Jasmine surveyed the room. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply said, "The door's open. Now make sure you're the kind of person who deserves to walk through it. And with that, the transformation began, not just of a brand, but of the very idea of luxury when used to elevate, not merely to shine. As Jasmine stepped down from the podium, the room stayed utterly still. Not stunned, transfixed. The most powerful woman in the building had just rendered a verdict, without vengeance. Change without disgrace. But for one person, the moment landed like thunder in her chest. Lucille stood near a rear marble pillar, fingers clenched around the edge of the welcome tray. She hadn't moved in over 10 minutes. Her breaths were shallow. Her gaze hadn't left Jasmine since the first word. She felt her throat tighten, not from fear, but from recognition. That woman, that story, Mary, her face, her voice, her grief. Lucille had seen it unfold and said nothing. For 5 weeks, she tried to forget. She told herself she was just an intern, still in her trial period, helpless. But as Jasmine spoke, Lucille realized she hadn't buried guilt. She had buried complicity. She hadn't locked the door shut, but she hadn't opened it either. And now, the woman she watched walk away in the rain stood like royalty beneath crystal chandeliers. And Jasmine, who could have fired them all, had chosen something else, something far scarier. She had chosen to see who would rise when no one was forcing them. Lucille stepped forward. She didn't have a plan, only that she couldn't stay frozen. Her shoes echoed softly on the marble as she made her way across the floor, cutting through murmurs and darting glances until she reached the stage. Jasmine looked at her, calm, expectant, not surprised. Lucille's voice trembled as she took the mic. "I remember her," she said. Gasps fluttered through the crowd like sparks. "I remember what happened that day," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I saw how she was dismissed. I saw how no one asked why. And I saw how she didn't beg or break down. She just walked away. I wanted to speak up. I should have spoken up. But I was scared. I was new. I didn't want to lose my job." She looked down, her chest rising with emotion. "But that's not a reason. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just delays the harm for the next person." No one interrupted. "I want to help change that," Lucille said. "Because if people like me stay silent, the door never opens." Jasmine stepped closer, not smiling, but nodding, like someone watching a match catch fire. With a brief glance to her chief of operations, she turned back to the mic. "Lucille," she said, voice ringing clear, "you've just become the first head of human-centered experience at Maison de Coteau." The words echoed like a bell. Lucille blinked. "You'll lead our dignity immersion program," Jasmine continued. "You'll shape how we listen, how we observe, how we teach respect, not as performance, but as instinct." Lucille's hands trembled. She could hardly process what was happening. "You were silent once," Jasmine said, "but you're not silent anymore. That's what matters." Applause erupted. Not the reserved, polite kind this crowd was used to, but something deeper, genuine, the kind that comes when someone finally names a truth everyone has been avoiding. Later that night, after the event had wrapped, Lucille sat alone in the now quiet showroom. Her name was already printed on a new badge. She traced the embossed letters with her thumb. Lucille Dioqua, Director, Dignity First Experience. She laughed quietly. A few hours earlier, she wasn't sure she'd make it through the week. Now, she held the keys to the future of one of France's most storied fashion houses. But it wasn't the title that brought tears to her eyes. It was what Jasmine had whispered to her before leaving. "Empathy," she'd said, "doesn't need perfection, just courage when it matters." And now Lucille had both. The woman who once stood unnoticed in the corner would now design every welcome. And from that moment forward, no one would ever walk through those doors unseen again. The gala concluded. Guests departed in waves, some quiet, others wide-eyed, still shaken. But the moment didn't end with the closing doors. The story spilled beyond the chandeliers and polished stone. It bled into Paris, then to London, then across oceans. By morning, the first headline appeared in Lyon. American Congresswoman buys Parisian fashion house after mother was denied service. Hours later, The Guardian followed. A door closed. A daughter bought the building. By midday, the story was global. CNN led with a special report. When dignity costs billions, Jasmine Crockett and the Maison de Coteau Revolution. BBC dubbed it a retail reckoning. Al Jazeera, luxury justice and the woman who changed everything. Silently, clips of Jasmine's speech went viral. The moment she said, "My mother doesn't need to prove she belongs here," was viewed over 30 million times within 48 hours, translated into 19 languages. TikTok creators reenacted the monologue. Editorials poured in. Fashion critics who once lauded exclusivity scrambled to redefine what luxury meant in a world now watching, where it had just been shattered and rebuilt. But the part that caught fire wasn't Jasmine. It was Mary. News agencies scrambled to learn more about the silver-haired woman who had walked away in silence and returned through the front door. Not with anger, but with grace. They uncovered photos of her from earlier that year, smiling beside neighborhood children at a local food pantry, speaking at a community wellness clinic in Dallas, walking through the halls of her granddaughter's school with her arm looped through her cane and her posture upright. She had never sought the spotlight, but the spotlight found her anyway. The New York Times ran a headline that morning, "The Mother Who Changed the Model." Time magazine placed her portrait, dignified, calm, silver-crowned, on the cover, with 5 words etched beneath it: "This door opens for everyone." Fashion magazines once fixated on red carpets began publishing essays about Mary's poise, her quiet resilience, her refusal to lash out, and the humility that gave the movement its authenticity. Vogue Italia called her a mother who rewrote the script of belonging. In Tokyo, digital billboards beamed her image across Shibuya Crossing. And still, Mary said very little. Journalists pleaded for interviews. Invitations poured in from talk shows, podcasts, major news networks, even documentary offers. She declined most of them. When she finally spoke, it was at a modest press conference arranged by her local church. A plain podium.
No lights.
Just a single microphone, and her scarf softly draped over her shoulders. "I didn't open any doors," she said quietly. "I just knocked. My daughter's the one who decided to buy the building." A ripple of soft laughter moved through the room. Then she turned solemn. "But this isn't just about me," she continued. "It's about every woman who's walked into a room and felt like she had to shrink to fit it. Every parent who's worked 2 jobs and still been treated like they couldn't afford dignity. This is about being seen, finally." Her words landed harder than any headline, because Mary hadn't come to be a symbol. She had simply wanted to buy a scarf. And in doing so, she had rewoven the fabric of an entire industry. Luxury retailers across the globe held emergency meetings. Executives voiced anxious questions in boardrooms once known for champagne and tight control. Who else has door policies like this? What if something like this happens in New York? Do we need our own version of dignity first? Within a month, 5 major European fashion houses had introduced new customer inclusion standards. Within 2, Jasmine's Dignity First model had been licensed to 4 international retail chains. But through all of it, Mary stayed grounded. She still took her morning walks. She still brewed her own tea. And when someone recognized her in a small flower shop on the outskirts of Montmartre and asked for a photo, she smiled and replied, "Only if you let me take one of you too." In the overlapping worlds of politics and fashion, she was now being called the conscience of the industry. Some proposed naming scholarships in her honor. Others suggested placing a statue near the newly renovated entrance of Maison de Coteau. But the most powerful image came from a child. It was a hand-drawn picture, sent from a classroom in Detroit. Crayons and markers showed a woman with gray hair and a scarf standing beside a little girl at the base of a golden door. On the back, the child had written, "Thank you for opening it for us." Mary tucked the drawing into her travel journal. She didn't say much. She didn't need to, because the world had already heard her voice, even when all she did was walk away in silence. But the ripple didn't stop at headlines or hashtags. What Jasmine had done was no longer just fashion news. It was a shift in global conversation. one that reshaped the landscape across multiple industries and transformed a quiet act of justice into a sweeping international movement. And soon, the invitations began arriving, not from reporters or fashion summits, but from world leaders. The first came from the United Nations. They called it a historic milestone, inviting Jasmine to speak at the General Assembly during the annual Summit on Human Dignity and Economic Equality. She stood beneath the iconic blue and white emblem, her voice reverberating through the chamber, not as a legislator, but as a daughter who had reached her limit. "This isn't about fashion," Jasmine told the global delegates. "It's about the invisible cost we attach to belonging, about locked doors still disguised as policy or branding, and how easily we forget dignity was never ours to grant. It was always theirs to begin with." Applause roared from representatives of all 193 countries. Her words were translated into 42 languages in real time, but no translation dulled the impact of her final line. "When we design for humanity, profit follows. When we exclude it, collapse follows faster." Then came the TED Talk. Filmed on a stage bathed in soft red light, Jasmine stood alone, armed with nothing but her voice and a story the world believed it already understood. But this time, she didn't start with her mother. She started with Lucille, a young woman, Jasmine said, who once stood silently while an older woman was denied even basic courtesy. She was scared. She was new. But when her moment came to speak, she did. And now she's helping others learn to recognize what she once overlooked. The room sat in breathless stillness. Then Jasmine leaned in. "Sometimes," she said, "the bravest people are the ones who admit they stayed quiet, because from that honesty comes the kind of leadership we truly need." The video reached 18 million views within 3 days. By the time Jasmine stepped onto the stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, her presence wasn't just admired, it was seismic. In a hall filled with CEOs, policymakers, and tech moguls, she didn't present charts or forecasts. She offered truth. "We're not here to talk about growth," she said. "We're here to ask, growth for whom, and at what price?" She introduced a new framework, commerce rooted in equity, design focused on people first, and dignity woven into brand identity not as promotion, but as principle. Jasmine ended her speech with a single line. "We've spent too long building walls that resemble doors. It's time we built doors that open both ways." She received the forum's only standing ovation. But while Jasmine addressed the world from prominent platforms, someone else was speaking from the very floor she once polished. Lucille. A French magazine had reached out for an interview after the Dignity First initiative gained momentum across 3 continents. Lucille had declined twice, but something in her shifted, and this time she said yes. The photo was simple. Lucille in a black blazer, standing just inside Maison de Coto's redesigned entrance, the word respect pinned confidently to her chest. But the words, those carried weight like a confession. "I used to be afraid of losing my job," she admitted, "so I kept quiet. What I didn't see then was that I was losing something much more important. I was losing my conscience." When asked what caused the change, Lucille didn't hesitate. "I saw someone be humiliated, and I said nothing. That silence followed me home. It crept into my dreams. But when I saw her return, graceful, strong, still kind, I knew I couldn't be that girl in the corner anymore." She paused, then added, "Now I help people feel welcome. Not because it's my job, because it's the least we can do. Because every smile, every gesture, is a chance to mend something that never should have been broken." The article spread rapidly across Europe. Lucille became a quiet icon, a reminder that dignity isn't just a rule to enforce, but a culture to embody. Maison de Coto began hosting monthly empathy sessions, designed by Lucille herself, based on her personal journey. Sales associates weren't just trained anymore, they were transformed. And behind every global summit, every headline, every glossy magazine cover, there remained one silent constant. Mary. She didn't fly to Davos. She didn't walk the TED stage, but her story sat behind every microphone, like a beacon behind the mist. Not as a victim, but as the woman who knocked, and whose daughter turned that knock into a revolution. And the world, it was finally paying attention. When everything settled, when the spotlight dimmed, when the cameras stopped clicking, and the applause faded, what endured wasn't merely the story of a luxury store or a remarkable purchase. It was the question that refused to be buried. Why did it require power for a woman to be treated as worthy? Because at the very core of the storm, beyond the speeches, beyond the stages, beyond the sweeping reforms, there was still one moment that started it all. An elderly woman, standing in the Paris rain, quietly turned away, not with protest, but with a smile too thin to hold any warmth. Mary hadn't come to cause a scene. She came to purchase a scarf. And that was what made it all so devastating. She wasn't shouted at. She wasn't detained. She wasn't blatantly insulted. She was dismissed. And in today's world, that's how cruelty disguises itself. Not in breaking news, but in doorways. Not in fury, but in apathy. A glance, a stiff smile, a gesture that says, without saying, "You don't belong here." That's what Jasmine saw in her mother's eyes during that phone call. Not just pain, not just embarrassment. It was history repeating itself, quietly, efficiently, again. It was the same look Mary wore when banks turned her away as a single black mother, when landlords scrutinized her before claiming the apartments were taken, when teachers punished her children instead of preparing them. And Jasmine realized this wasn't about one scarf. It was about all the doors that had ever closed too quietly to draw attention. So she did something history rarely anticipates from women like her. She opened one, not only for her mother, not only for herself, for the nurse who shops without being seen, for the teacher afraid to reach for the cashmere, for the father wearing the same coat to every interview, for everyone who's ever been priced out of their own dignity. The message is clear. Dignity is not something earned by appearances. It isn't granted by titles, fashion, or finances. It is our inherent right. And yet every day we've allowed systems to treat it as if it were something reserved, marketed, measured, and locked behind velvet ropes. What Jasmine Crockett did was not revenge. It was restoration. She didn't shatter the rules. She redefined the value of what truly matters inside those walls. And she did it not by shouting, but by elevating the standard. Through Lucille's transformation, we discovered that silence may protect us from immediate risk, but it deprives us of deeper purpose. Her confession wasn't a weakness. It was a call for every bystander ready to choose a different side. And her evolution taught us something essential. Empathy isn't instinct. It's a discipline. It must be taught, practiced, lived. But the most powerful symbol through it all remained Mary. She never raised her voice. She never issued demands. She simply stood tall, held her head high, and spoke softly. And at last, the world had to listen, because perhaps the most radical act in an age obsessed with spectacle is grace. Mary walked away that day not to retreat, but to leave room for something far greater than outrage. Justice reimagined, not as punishment, but as a new blueprint for belonging. And that is the lesson. True power doesn't just open doors for itself. It leaves them open for others. Because someday, someone else will stand in the same place you once did, uncertain of whether they're enough. Whether or not they walk through will depend on what kind of world you leave behind. That's the real luxury now. Not exclusivity, but a space where everyone feels they were always meant to belong. And that's the door Mary Crockett walked through. And this time, it stayed open. But this story doesn't end here, because every day, somewhere, someone like Mary is turned away. Not with words, not with violence, but with the same cold smile, the same dismissive glance, the same unspoken judgment that says, "You don't belong here. You've seen it. Maybe you've felt it. Maybe you've delivered it." Now is the moment to ask, what kind of door are you standing in front of? Are you holding it open? Are you watching it close? Or are you brave enough to remove the hinges entirely? This isn't just about high-end stores or fashion labels. This is about how we treat one another when no one's looking, about what we choose to normalize, about whether dignity is merely a phrase we repeat or something we actively protect. So here's the truth. You don't need to be a congresswoman to make a difference. You don't need to buy a building, but you do need to speak up, to act, to interrupt, because silence has never opened a single door. But courage has pried open thousands. So hold the door, lift your voice, challenge the glance, redesign the room, not for applause, not for headlines, but so that one day when someone like Mary walks in, no one will ever question if she belongs. They'll just say, "Welcome. We've been waiting. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what touched you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.